Great lawyers don't always know how to build great law firms. Let's change that. Join Ben Gideon as he shares hard-won lessons from building his own financially successful law firm and practical insights from top law firm entrepreneurs, business consultants, and more. This is a podcast for lawyers, by lawyers. Welcome to Elevate, Build, and Grow Your Law Firm. Produced and powered by Law Pods.
Elevate, Build, and Grow Your Law Firm is sponsored by Supio. Supio is a cutting-edge AI program designed specifically for plaintiff trial lawyers. I have to say, I did their demo just the other day. It is a fantastic product. It does so many things well, but one of the things I was just blown away with is the way it creates medical bill summaries that have been the bane of the existence of paralegals and plaintiffs' firms for decades. It does it in seconds. It's able to identify every bill from every provider, organize it, and then identify records where there's a bill but no record, and it can keep that going throughout the life of the case. It can do a million other things, which we'll talk about as we go forward, but you should get on Supio. They just got their Series B funding. They've got 60 plus employees. It's a great business, and get on and do the demo and see what they can do for you if you're in a plaintiff's practice. We're also brought to you by Vision Spark. Vision Spark is the search firm that specializes in finding your law firm, someone like Jeff Wright. We used Vision Spark to find our COO, and I've got to tell you, it was an incredibly good process. So I can talk from the side of the business owner who's searching for a COO. What was the process like from your side, Jeff, as the person being recruited?
It was thorough. It was. I felt at times I was being interrogated, and it was a long process, but it was probably the most thorough process I've been through in my career. And their follow-up, even since I've been hired, we've had monthly calls, and they just want to follow up. And I think the way they put it was, we want to make sure we didn't sell you a bill of goods, Jeff. We want to make sure everything we told you was correct, that it was a good fit. What made it a good fit? What did we do right? What did we do wrong? And I think you couldn't ask for more in a search firm.
Yeah, and I think, we obviously made the right choice in hiring you, but they found just an amazing pool of really top-notch candidates, which, you were the best of, Jeff, which speaks to you. But they found people we never could have located on our own, people from different states, people with extraordinarily interesting backgrounds. The expense was actually worth its weight in gold. So I would highly recommend, if you're looking for an implementer or a COO, I think they can also do some other positions, but I would reach out and talk to the folks at Vision Spark. And finally, the podcast today is brought to you by 1% for Planet. Our firm, when we started, committed ourselves to joining 1% for Planet. 1% for Planet is an organization where members like ours commit to giving 1%, in our case, of all of our fee revenues to environmental nonprofit organizations. It's been a wonderful fit for us. We've probably contributed to 24 really great organizations that help preserve the environment, particularly in the northern New England states where we practice. It allows us opportunities to attend events like the one you just went to, Jeff.
Yeah, it's an organization down in southern Maine that is a refuge for injured wild animals, and they try and rehab them, and the ones that are unable to be rehabilitated to a point that they can go back to their natural environment, they house them there, and they use them as to teach classes and teach children. They've rescued somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 injured wild animals in the last 5 to 7 years. It's an extraordinary organization.
Yeah, and it's just so great to be able to support all these organizations. And when you are a member of 1% for Planet, one of the cool things is you're authorized to use the 1% logo, and we do. It's on our it's part of our branding as a firm. It's on all of our digital marketing. It tends to be on our it's on our letterhead. I mean, when we submit a brief to the court, it's got the 1% for Planet logo on it. And I just think it's a nice thing to have your business associated with something positive like that, to send a message to the world that you are giving back. And we would encourage all law firms that have the means and interest to contact 1% for Planet and become members. And if you do that, please reach out to us and we will give you a plug on the show as a new 1% for Planet member.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Elevate, Build, and Grow Your Law Firm. I'm Jeff Wright, Chief Operating Officer here at Gideon. As always, joined by owner, partner, Ben Gideon. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, Jeff, and welcome back from Montana.
Yes.
You were out at Glacier National Park doing some hiking, and it's good to see you back in one piece. How did it go?
It was incredible. A week in Glacier, and I'm getting old. Hiking every day for 7 days is not as easy as it was when I was in my 20s and 30s. So, but gorgeous, and getting back into the swing of things here. I come back and we're finishing up Q3, and we have to start prepping for our Q4 goals and year-end wrap-up and everything. So it's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, you're making me tired just thinking about everything we have on our plate. But with that, we won't delve into too much more of that today. I'm really pleased to welcome to the podcast Tim Zerillo. Tim is a good friend and a stellar criminal defense lawyer, prominent lawyer here in the state of Maine, and also regular national speaker at criminal defense organizations across the country. In fact, Tim, I believe you just got back from Virginia, where you were speaking to a group of lawyers out there, right?
Yeah, that's right. At DC, and then 3 days back in Maine and back to the Virginia State Bar to speak. So it's a lot of fun to do, though.
And I don't know I stalk you, of course, on social media, and don't know all the details of your personal life, but I do know you work hard and you play hard. I notice you're always in the summertime, you tend to be out on Sebago Lake on your beautiful boat. And then in the winter, you're at your the Southern Zerillo offices in South Beach in Miami. So whatever you're doing, you're doing something right, from what I can tell.
Well, thanks. Yeah, we try to play hard and work hard. Although you've got to mention the name of the boat, Ben. I don't know if you've ever noticed that.
I did not notice it.
Yeah, the name of the boat is the KNOT Guilty.
Oh,
The not guilty.
Oh,
Little
not guilty.
Not guilty.
I like it.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. So I guess a good boat name often is some kind of a pun, right? So
Well, I don't know
that's
if it's
good.
good or not, but I like it. So
The not guilty.
yeah.
So, we could do a whole episode talking about trial strategy and how you put together and defend the criminal cases, but this is our podcast on building and growing a law firm. And one reason I really wanted to have you on is because I remember you telling me probably around a year ago that you were at a seminar speaking to a group of criminal defense lawyers, and there were lots of lawyers that were raising questions about firm management and business issues. And there's lots of anxiety about that among the criminal defense bar. And so as somebody who's built a very successful practice, we thought we would just kind of jump in and ask you what are the issues that you see facing criminal defense lawyers, and what are some of the solutions you've found to some of those issues?
Well, there are tons of issues practice-wise facing criminal defense lawyers, right? But that's not what the subject matter is exactly. Although that bleeds into the practice management stuff. If you're, for example, when you're hiring a paralegal, I have to say that paralegal that people are going to be calling our office accused of crimes related to children. I don't hide that. I need them to know up front. Somebody's going to be calling our office who is alleged to have committed a horrible violent crime. It's going to happen. That's the nature of the business. I want people to know right up front about that. And so when you're hiring, if I'm hiring lawyers out of law school, which I've done a lot, or if I'm hiring anyone in the firm, I need them to know that the firm culture is about no matter who's on the other end of that line, they're a human being. We're going to treat them with respect. We're going to get them information, whether they're innocent or they're guilty. And so, that's from obviously that's something that a criminal defense lawyer needs to embrace. When I was speaking in Virginia, as you mentioned, one of my opening slides is the sister. I get nerdy about a nun, Sister Helen Parisian. We're better than the worst thing we've ever done. If we don't, as criminal defense lawyers and as a criminal defense firm, if we don't have that philosophy, then we're in trouble from the get-go. And so that on the business side of things, I need employees to embrace that firm culture. And so that right off the bat is a big challenge. Not everybody does. And I've walked away from and had potential employees walk away from me because they're like, I just don't know that I could do that. And that's cool. That's cool. So there are a lot of really interesting challenges to running a criminal defense firm that surround that issue to begin with. And then you have the typical challenges of running any law firm. But it really depends on what you're talking about. It covers everything. It covers everything from the beginning of the firm to exit and saleability of the firm. Criminal defense practices are just different.
Yeah, and Tim, I wonder on the civil side here, when Ben started this firm with Taylor, they made a conscious decision where they could not be everything to everyone. So the firm focuses on catastrophic personal injury and medical malpractice. We don't do family law, we don't do workers' comp. I guess from the criminal side, are you more trying to be everything to everyone on the criminal side, or do you have a particular niche that you try to adhere to?
So that's a great question. So as I've gone along, I'm 25 years into this now. When I started off as a criminal defense lawyer, the system in the state of Maine, which is still largely the same, was you could go to the clerk's office or go to a judge and say, "Hey, will you give me criminal defense cases?" I remember the pay was $35 an hour. I remember the I remember the clerk in Auburn, who may still be there, told me she would give me some cases, but I wasn't allowed to charge for my 45-minute drive from Portland. So you start there, and then and then at least I transitioned into private work eventually. And then, I become, at least for me, it doesn't work this way for everybody, but I become more and more specialized. And I tell people my practice is primarily sex, drugs, and white collar crime. No rock and roll. I mean, that's pretty much what I do now. That's 90% of my practice. Every once in a while, I'll do something that is different. But that's not the way for my associates, right? My associates, when they start, I feel it's good to kind of be a generalist at the start, to be fair. I tell them to do some family law cases. It gets them into court. So the reality of a criminal, your question's a really good one, because if I hire a lawyer out of law school and they're 2 years into their practice, let's say, nobody's hiring them for a big federal drug conspiracy case. It's just not going to happen. Are you going to spend that type of money on somebody who's 2 years in? Probably not. And so I think you have to kind of be more of a generalist. At least this is my attitude at the start. You take all the smaller cases. The vast majority of the cases I tried were when I was that court-appointed lawyer, because it didn't matter. I would try an operating after suspension case. Who cares? Trial might take 2 hours. Bring the jury in and try it. So I think, but as you go along and as your reputation builds, you have the ability, you have the privilege, frankly, of being able to say no to a lot of cases. And that's what I do. I was telling somebody the other day, I had an offer for $100,000 retainer to take a case that is just not what I do. And I said no to it. The $100,000 would be nice. My wife is my CFO. She would have liked me to take the case. But it's not about that $100,000. It's going to take up a certain amount of my time and my practice. I'm going to have to ignore other things. And the other case that's coming along, I might not be able to take. So the power of no is really important. So I think, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, Jeff, but really, I think at least as I've gone along, I've narrowed the scope of what I do.
Okay. No, I think you answered it perfectly, and I think it tells people that, any individual looking to go out on their own or build a practice, I think in order to cut their teeth, they're gonna have to be a generalist out of the gate, and to your point, not really have the privilege of picking and choosing until they've cut their teeth enough and made a reputation. So,
If I could just add to that, one of the
yeah.
things that's interesting that you made me think of there, Jeff, is that, criminal defense lawyers have tend to be solos when they're on their own. And I did that right out of the gate. And I have told many people that was an idiotic move. I would never do that 25 years in. I was brash enough to think that I could do it. I have survived, but it's unwise for the vast majority of people, and it was probably unwise for me. I think that, criminal defense lawyers really, when they're thinking about opening their practices, to me, should be mentoring with somebody in a small firm. And then if they decide later on they want to open their own practice, they should. Because it's too complex. There are too many, and people's liberty is at stake. So you want to be as good as you possibly can. You want all your knives sharpened.
It's interesting that you say that most criminal defense lawyers, many are solos. Do you think that's a function primarily of the economics of the practice, that it's not a scalable type of business, or is it more the personality traits of the lawyers that are running those practices?
That's a great question. I think it's both. On the personality trait side, I will say, we have a tendency to be kind of like us against the world. Now, the nice thing about criminal defense lawyers, and I will say, the only comparable to me to criminal defense lawyers in this way are people who do things like plaintiffs' personal injury, med mal, products type work, because that also it's you against corporations and insurance companies. Here it's us against the government. So even though we tend to be slightly like lone wolves, we do we do share information a lot. We're really great about that. Our associations are very strong. I've been involved in both the Maine Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers as its president. I've served 2 terms and I'm still in leadership of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. The people will rally around you, but we do tend to have a little bit of a us against the government type of mentality, and we don't mind getting into that fight. On the scalability thing that you mentioned, it is very difficult to scale a criminal defense practice. Now, I know people who try to do it. If you took my practice, for example, where I have 3 associates, all doing less serious criminal defense work, although my senior associate is now taking, federal cases and that sort of thing. I don't know how I would scale it. My attitude, by the way, with owning a criminal defense practice is I just want people to do the best quality work possible. And I know I have friends who, let's say they focus on drunk driving defense. That's something that maybe I could see that you could scale. Maybe you combine it with a family law or a domestic law type firm. A lot of them, to attempt to scale it, what they do is they take their name off of the firm. It'll be blah, 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 criminal defense firm instead of last name, criminal defense firm. Because the problem inherently with the scalability question, Ben, is I bring the business in. I have associates who do great work. It's very rare that they bring in a case. Sometimes they do. But the vast majority of the cases are coming because I've been doing this work for the last 25 years in this jurisdiction. So they come to me. And so from a scaling perspective, if some out-of-state big criminal defense firm or other firm wanted to buy me, how do they do that and take my name off the door? It becomes way harder to scale. So that's another reason, perhaps, that if you're doing this work, a lot of people exist in a smaller office.
But Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, you started out as a sole practitioner, and you have 3 associates now. What was the break point to scale up to add an associate? Was it the amount of work, or at what point did you say you needed help?
Thank you for that question. So I started out, I say I started my own firm. I started out doing everything. I literally went to a local lawyer. I said, "Hey, I don't have any money." My wife and I had just gone through law school. We just had our oldest daughter. I had my oldest daughter 2 days before I graduated from law school, and we said, yeah, quite a year.
Get
And
everything
we
out of the
said,
way at once.
why not? Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I said, to my wife, "Look, we're used to not having anything. So maybe I should just start a firm because if I go take a paycheck, maybe I get used to having a paycheck." Again, I don't know that that was smart, but that's the way I did it. And when I did it, I just went to local lawyers who did criminal defense work and I said, "Hey, do you have a corner that you're not using where I could put a desk? I'll do work for you for free. Just let me have that corner." And that's how I started it. So I tell people in my firm, I have done every single job to do in this firm at one time or another. The need issue, I think, yes, you have enough business, you want to, you wanna make more money, obviously, that certainly is helpful, and it becomes this transition. I remember thinking the first time I hired an associate, "Geez, can I sustain this?" But I think like any other business venture, you have to take some leaps of faith, you have to trust yourself. And I did it. My first associate worked for me for 7 or so years, and she now runs a successful business, and we have a great relationship. And so it was something that was, I think it's kind of a leap of faith. But Jeff, the other thing for me too that I'll say is I don't, I want to expand. For example, I could expand right now. We are turning away a lot of business from a financial standpoint. My father was an economist. He'd probably look at me and say, "You're crazy." So, all right. So, and I understand that, but I always want to expand correctly. It's very important to me that I have people in my firm with personalities that jive with mine and the rest of the firm. You don't have to be like me, but you just have, we have to be friendly. It's very important to me that people in the firm get along. We're dealing with such difficult subject matter. The last thing you want is to be dreading going to the office. And I've had offices I've worked in where you dread that. So for me, the choice was yes. At first I have enough. I have enough business. I think I can do this, and that worked out well. And then future expansion issues are about like who it is. And I'll get as an example. My third associate went to Bowdoin, graduated, wanted to work for me as a paralegal. I said, "Great, very bright young man." Then he decided to go to law school. He did. Third year of law school, he wanted to come back to work for me. I didn't have the space. I made the space, right? And the reason I did that was because I knew who he was. So that's the more important issue to me. I will turn away business. I will turn away money. I have no issue saying no to money. I don't like it, but I'll do it because not all money is good money.
First of all, I am always so impressed by you and the people who do your job because I think it's extremely challenging. The deck is often stacked against you. You've got the whole force of the state yet you're combating, and the economics of it are difficult, as you pointed out. I mean, the reality is most people accused of crimes in America are not wealthy people that have lots of extra money sitting around to pay lawyers, and our state in Maine and many other places does not support criminal defense practices as they should by paying you what you deserve to do that really difficult work. And so when I think about the challenges of like building a viable economic model for the criminal side, I wonder how you do that with all of those built-in kind of structural challenges. And then if you're hiring lawyers, obviously they want to be paid. And if they're really good and smart and successful, at some point they're going to want to get paid more probably. And then you have to pay your staff as well. And also you would enjoy, I'm sure, making a profit on the business you do, which you obviously have done because you managed to live a nice life outside of the practice. But can you just talk a little bit about those structural challenges? And are there ways that people that have been successful in building criminal defense practices have overcome that to still build a kind of an economically viable business model there?
Yeah. So let's just start with the indigent defense side. If you're doing indigent defense work, most states are pure PD office at this point. That's not all the way, as you know, Ben. In Maine, we have some limited PD offices now, but really private practitioners handle the bulk of the criminal defense work. So from that perspective, if you're doing that work like the way I started my practice, the first 5 or so years of my practice, you're just not going to be rich. You want to pay the bills. That is a calling. As Johnny Cochran said, you're doing God's work or the Lord's work there. You really are. And, I think most people, when they make money doing that sort of thing, at least in Maine, you can do it this way. If you're in a PD office, you can't. You could also do, a side PI case, an auto accident case. You could do a side family law case, something like that. As far as, if you're in private practice, it is definitely easier to make money as long as your reputation is good. And if your reputation is good, one of the big advantages that I have as a criminal defense lawyer is even if I say no to the case that's calling me right now, somebody else is going to call me. At some point, I know my reputation has gotten good enough that I'm going to have a referral from Ben Gideon, or I'm going to have a call from an old client or whatever, or somebody from out of state who saw me speak is going to give me a ring. I appreciate all those. And so but I know when that's coming, you can be a little bit more choosy. So I think if you just focus as a criminal defense lawyer, let's say you are not taking court appointed cases, but you're starting, let's just say, one of the keys is to really keep your expenses low, right? I mean, when I was in a position where I didn't know if I'd get another case, because that'd be my attitude. Well, I'll maybe never get another case as long as I live. Who knows? You know, when you're in that position and you don't know, you might go a week, you might go 2 weeks without getting a new case, and you've got bills to pay. That's until you have a moat, as Warren Buffett would say, around your business, an economic moat. You are in. You really have to keep those expenses low. And I think that is something where criminal defense lawyers go wrong very quickly. When I was transitioning to purely private clients, one of the first things I focused on in my home economics was just paying off my house. Because my theory was that if I could get my house paid off early, and by the way, if you weren't raised by an economist and you don't know this, it doesn't take much to turn your 30-year mortgage into a 10 or 15-year mortgage. Just figure out what that extra principal payment is. It's not a lot. So one of the first things I was focused on was paying off my house because I always needed to have a place where my wife and kids could be. If I had a bad month, I didn't have to worry about, or bad couple of months being foreclosed upon. So that's one of the things I think criminal defense lawyers can sometimes feel like they need to be too flashy up front, need to chase things like cars. You secure your personal finances, and that helps secure your firm. And that's what we did, and that has helped us out tremendously through leaner times, through times like COVID, when they weren't charging cases, right? I mean, you remember there was a couple of years there where at least our local police department was charging only things that were exigent or cold case murders. And that was it.
So, Tim, one thing we've talked about on previous episodes is we had talked that if you're an associate at an existing firm right now and you're thinking about going out on your own, or you have your own practice but you're thinking about expanding, the economics are obviously important, but we really ground it down to that if you don't have that entrepreneurial spirit, you're not going to succeed and you shouldn't do it. So I guess flipping it to the criminal side, if there's a public defender out there or somebody at a as an associate at a criminal defense firm that wants to go out on their own, aside from having an entrepreneurial spirit, what are the other intangibles that they really need to have?
Well, I think that you're right, Jeff. The entrepreneurial spirit is key. You have to want to, run this business. The other thing too is, and what Ben was talking about earlier, I've moderated a couple of panels among criminal defense lawyers for the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers on business of law type topics, and it's really is interesting. We get a strong response because of that exact question, Jeff. Like, is this something I really want to do? Um, First of all, I tell people you don't have to do it. I know great criminal defense lawyers, like killer, amazing criminal defense lawyers who crush at trials and are just wonderful people who never want to run a business. And I can't blame them because it doesn't necessarily translate. What gets you into criminal defense might be your sense of justice, might be your sense of fair play. Maybe you've got a slightly anti-government bent, whatever. That's cool. And that does not necessarily translate to business owner slash entrepreneur, right? I mean, that's a different skill set. And even if you could do it, doesn't mean you want to. So I was sitting there thinking a little bit about what I was going to say today. And sometimes I discourage people from, as you can see, I'm kind of discouraging people from, from sometimes just jumping into starting their own practice because there are other ways to do it. And we can talk about that. But, I was just looking at how much time I had spent this year. We just finished the first 3 quarters, right? Because I track my time. And I'd spent about 300 hours in my managerial role for a Zerillo law firm. And I spent close to another 300 hours in my work for the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. I don't know. I didn't do the math as to what that calculates to, but that is a lot of time a year I am spending either managing the firm or basically volunteering my time for an organization I believe in. So my point is that you have to want to take on that other work. I don't think it should just be for the purpose of, hey, you know, I want to make more money. Because there's always ways to do that. Find a firm that is doing really well and then say, "Hey, I'm this awesome criminal defense lawyer you may or may not know. Pay me." I mean, I'd be okay with that. I'm okay with paying my people well to do hard work. So I think one of the things you need to do, I mean, that entrepreneurial spirit, Jeff, you talked about, is important. It's also important to want to manage people. On my own, I'm pretty easy. My wife is the CFO of our firm. I could literally be a solo at any time, charge a ridiculous amount of money, have my wife do the books, and my life would frankly be way easier. You have to want to manage people. You have to want to be engaged with other criminal defense lawyers. I'm always going to get questions. Sometimes I'm a little annoyed at getting these questions because I'm in the middle of writing a brief or I'm on a deadline or whatever, but you have to be willing to answer those questions and get into it with people. So I think that's really important. I mean, obviously just on the solo end, you can be a lone wolf if you want to. The downside of that is, it can be isolating. So a lot of lawyers leave a PD office or associates, and they go out and act as a solo. And I've done that job. It can feel very overwhelming when it's you against the government all the time. So if you're deciding to do that, I would really urge people to get involved with criminal defense associations that they believe in. And that's what I did because I was a solo for a long time and I got involved with our local affiliate. And that's why I'm in leadership at the NACDL now, is because at that point I needed that outside perspective from people who were doing what I did. So I think those are the issues. If you're going out as a solo, isolating, obviously you have to be aware of your own financial situation and how much you can absorb, how much risk you can absorb. Criminal defense lawyers get in trouble because they mess with fees or, that they shouldn't, or they don't handle an IOLTA account appropriately, all that. As you all know, it costs money to run a firm. Every associate in a firm, every associate I've ever had only sees the money that comes in. They don't see the money that flows out. And there's a lot of money that flows out.
Need help on a complex personal injury or medical malpractice case? Gideon Asen accepts case referrals and regularly co-counsels with lawyers nationwide on high-value claims. The firm has recovered millions of dollars in cases that competitors turned away because they dig deeper. Ready to learn more? Email bgideon@gideonasenlaw.com to start the conversation. Gideon Asen shares fees as permitted by the laws of each state. Don't let complex cases overwhelm your practice. Elevate justice together with Gideon Asen.
Can you talk a little bit about what business model you've seen most successful other than the solo? Is it criminal defense practices that do exclusively criminal defense, or are you seeing that most successful practices that are larger scale have a wider diversity of practice area types where there are ways to hedge against the cycles that may affect criminal defense? You do see a lot of firms that handle family law cases. Maybe they do probate work, they do criminal defense, they may dabble in personal injury or other kinds of plaintiff contingent fee cases. As you talk to your brethren around the country, is that what you see more with a kind of a larger practice? Or are there any examples of kind of a large criminal defense practice, 10 to 50 lawyers under one umbrella that are all just doing criminal defense cases?
Yeah, in bigger cities. If you're in Miami, if you're in Chicago, if you're in New York, if you're in LA, if you're in Phoenix, etc. Yeah, you see those firms that are, exclusive to criminal defense. And they're, 10, 20 or more lawyer firms with some great lawyers. So I think a lot of it is what the calling is in this area. So like my associates do, they'll take some family cases on. If it's a good PI that doesn't go to Ben Gideon, because because it's too complex for me, then they might do something like that. But you know, because really, I mean, and you look at my practice, having done it 25 years, I go anywhere in the state. I am have gun will travel because we don't have a lot of crime in the state, which
It
is
sucks
great.
to live in a state with low crime.
Yeah, no,
That's what I've
my
often
other
said.
criminal defense brethren kind of make fun of me, like, what? Nothing. There's no crime in Maine, right?
Need more
You
RICO
know,
cases.
yeah, no RICO cases, certainly. That's true. Although you could bring a civil RICO out of Gideon Asen, that'd be interesting. So, I mean, I think that is part of the issue. I don't see in Maine, for example, I don't see, the 10 to 15 lawyer criminal defense firm. We had when I left, I started a firm, then I had a partnership that I joined in 2015, which only lasted 3 years. It was not for me, so I left it. And we had 6 lawyers in that firm, and we were all doing criminal defense work to some degree. I have a friend who ran a larger criminal defense focused firm in Maine for a while, which is now mostly disbanded. And that was because they were taking a lot of court appointed work. So I'm assuming you're talking about somebody private counsel, work. I don't think there's enough to feed everybody in this state for a firm that size, but elsewhere there is. I think what happens though a lot is what you described, which is you have a good size, call it litigation firm, and you have a few people who do criminal defense work. Because one of the advantages of criminal defense work over like your type of work is it is more regular. Let's say you are a very skilled drunk driving attorney. There's going to be business. It's going to exist. It is going to be way more regular than a products case coming in or a huge verdict coming in. There is some business advantage that way, for those types of practices. But it is very difficult to, unless you're in a large city, it's very difficult to have a criminal defense only firm that's 10 to 20 lawyers, I find.
Tim, you were kind of talking about your allocation of time earlier. We're we're in a stage of a 4 year strategic plan and growth, and Ben in his role, which is virtually the same role as you in your firm, a big portion of Ben's role is to mentor our associates and get them to a point down the road where Ben is not the first chair on every vital case here. And he spends a lot of time with the teams and the associates mentoring and building their skill set. How much of that are you doing, and how important is that on your side?
It's super important to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, and by the way, I'm aware of your strategic vision because I listen to this podcast. It's a great podcast. It's a great podcast. There's my shameless
It's
plug.
better today.
I like that, Tim.
It's better today than it usually is.
You should come on next week.
Sure. Anytime you need me, I'm here. But I do really love it. Yeah. So I think I look at it as it's kind of like a coaching tree, right? Like the Bill Parcells coaching tree or something like that. I mean, my impact, whatever it is in this state or anywhere, in my profession is going to last longer through the people who I've been able to work with. And so I think it's important from that perspective. It's obviously important that your firm is pushing out the quality product that you expect. And I don't know that they can necessarily push out that same quality product for Gideon Asen without getting into Ben's brain, without getting access to Taylor's brain. So I think that, that's all very important. It's also a huge time suck. And it really is. And that's you were asking before, Jeff, about one of the things you have to expect if you're going to be opening a firm. Well, if it involves associates and paralegals, et cetera, if you're not just strictly that solo lone wolf, then it's important that you take that time to do it. We have scheduled meetings. I've scheduled meetings with my associates individually. We have scheduled attorney meetings where we brainstorm things, staff meetings, lots of meetings, maybe not as many huddles as Gideon Asen, but we have a lot of meetings. And frankly, there's a line there between, losing productivity and gaining competence, but somewhere you have to find that line. And I think it's important. The other thing I will say too, and I don't know, now I'm going to sound like making a generational point, but I do think that as you hire lawyers in their 20s, as I've done several times, there is more of an expectation of mentoring. And that was, my generation, I don't know that I expected that much mentoring. It was kind of like, go do it. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. It was just kind of more of a sink or swim. And, I've had to adjust that. My question usually used to be when people walked into my office, asking a question about, pick a crime, whatever, doesn't matter what it is. I'd say, all right, tell me all the research you've done before you walked into my office to bother me. People at least of this generation
Don't respond well to that.
enjoy that.
No.
And so I have to adjust because I can't be the cranky old man going, get off my lawn, no matter how much gray there is in this beard, it just doesn't work that way. And it's really important to me that these folks feel supported. And every time I do a review, for an annual review for an associate, one of the things I'm asking them is, how can I support you more? How can the firm support you more? Because that really is important to me, because I know it's important to them. Occasionally you have somebody who's just complete self-starter who will just do everything. They just don't care. That's just their personality, and that's cool. But a lot of people who are great lawyers feel more comfortable with that level of support.
Let me just piggyback off that. So, and I think this translates to any industry, and I've heard this from people throughout the years. They're like, geez, I spent years coaching and mentoring and building their skill set, and then they left me and started their own firm or started their own business. So what are you doing to retain your talent, maybe outside of the economics or the culture? Is there something particular you're trying to do there? Because I think talent retention in any industry is a huge concern.
First of all, I think it's very important that one of the things that's great about that younger generation of lawyers that's now come up is I also find that they really want to be involved with causes that are important to them. And so going back to the beginning of this discussion, if I'm sitting there at the hiring process going, look, this is what we do. I'm not hiding the ball. You're going to hear some horrible things. You may have to go to a crime scene that really shakes you. You may be looking at autopsy photos. You might hear about children who are allegedly being abused in horrific ways. I'm doing that because I'm front loading. I want them to know up front. And if those people are saying to me, yeah, the interest of justice is really important to me. I can get past the facts that make me squirm. I'm a human being. They might make me squirm, but I can get past that because I'm really interested in representing the person. I'm not quite to your question, but I'm going to get there, Jeff.
No.
I say to people all the time, the, a lot of my clients, I don't know what the percentage is, but a lot of my clients are guilty, and I like them anyway. Okay. And if you don't have that attitude as a criminal defense lawyer where you can find the humanity in somebody, then you're in trouble from the outset. So what I find is the other thing that's kind of an intangible, other than the economics, as you said, other than mentoring, is if you feel like, and this is important to me too, if you feel like you're a part of a team that is really working hard for a noble purpose in a very tough environment, that's another reason why you stick around. And I've been lucky enough to have associates stick around a long time with me. Sometimes I hire them right out of law school and they'll, stay for a long time. And that's what I have right now. And they're great people and they find these issues important. And so that's the other thing. It's not just personality driven. I do need it's not, we can have debate. We might not always align on politics, for example, sometimes. That's cool. But we do have to align on ideas of justice and how you treat people.
Yeah. And I think that matches what we do. I mean, we put our core values in every job description, and someone could have the best resume on the planet or the best credentials, but if they're not going to fit our culture and adhere to our core values, they're not going to be a good part or a good team member. We move on. So it sounds
Yeah,
like you're the same way.
that's right. I mean, I remember, and I won't name the lawyer. He was a friend of mine. Ben will know who it was, but a very famous Maine lawyer who's not around anymore. I remember him saying, "It's not about the client; it's about me." I've never been. Yes, I mean, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I'm a courtroom lawyer, right? We all have huge egos, but it also has to be about the client. And so I would stay away from a young lawyer who's coming up to me, and confidence is good, but make I want to make sure they know how important it is that we protect the client. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And so that's the culture. That's the buy-in. I think once we have that buy-in from our employees, that's one of the reasons why they stick around. And by the way, that bleeds down to paralegals too. I mean, I have the same discussion with paralegals. If you're the secretary, I don't care who you are, if you work in the firm, I want you to treat people with respect, and I want you to know that even if they're accused of doing something that's really horrible, that they're still a person and we treat them with respect.
Tim, you've obviously been very successful at developing your private defense practice based on your own reputation over a number of years. What advice do you have to lawyers that are kind of at the beginning of the curve there, who may be doing an indigent defense practice or getting the cases where they can, but are trying to burnish that reputation and build, name recognition and get a docket of paying clients for their criminal defense practice?
Give back. And what I mean by that is it's not just about you. Find your local bar association. Hopefully there is an NACDL affiliate where you are. Go to that local bar association and volunteer for something that they're doing. And that sounds really antithetical to your question, which is because you're talking about making, how do we make money and create a successful firm? So giving your time sounds really stupid. I find that pays you back in the end. I really do. And it pays you back in a number of ways. Now, I can only speak from my own experience, but when I was that lone wolf, that I was talking about, and I didn't know anybody, I don't think I'd ever met a lawyer before I went to law school. And I mean, I didn't, this is not what I came from. When I'm struggling and doing my best as a solo in that corner office, where I'm bartering for, little 50-foot office space, I eventually said, I need to know people who know more than I do. And so I looked to our local criminal defense association, the Maine Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. I found out when they were having meetings for their continuing legal education committee. And I walked in, and Steve Schwartz and Gail Latouf said, sure, just hang around. And then you find things to do, and you learn so much by giving to an organization. You're taking way more in the beginning. And I didn't care what I was doing. I would do anything for them. And and then that grew into me being involved with NACDL, and now I'm also in the American Board of Criminal Lawyers, which is an honor. And I think really in my space, specifically in the criminal defense space, if you're thinking about exiting a PD office, if you are thinking about leaving, as an associate of a bigger firm and, starting a solo firm or something like that, you really have to expect to give your time to causes that are related to the criminal legal system. We don't call it the criminal justice system. It is the criminal legal system. And you give to those causes, and you will find it will pay you back, because you will be, and it's not just directly in referrals. It's just that but you'll become a better lawyer. You just will over time.
And is that you're getting your cases though at this point primarily through referrals and just word of mouth on the street from other people you've represented? Is that, or because you're not doing any like direct to consumer marketing, are you?
Oh, we have a website, and we have things like that. We have a blog on the website, which is not terribly active. I find that for my firm, either the cases are coming in because somebody's heard of me, an old client is recommending them, or an attorney's recommending them. That's it. And and sometimes that's the way they come to my associates, and sometimes my associates clients will find, the website. So that's more like, I guess that's the closest thing that I have to direct to consumer marketing. Otherwise, I'm not out there on TV. I've never used Google AdWords or anything like that. And for my personal practice now, I don't mean the firm, but when you get to a certain point, I much prefer the referral anyway, because the reality is that I don't know, there's not a lot of sales going on. Early on, I had to learn. I remember my associate said to me in this robbery case I took on a few years ago, they were listening to me take this phone call. It was a cold call. This was not a referral. And they said, how did you do that to make that person trust you while you were on the phone? And I said, look, when you've got a baby at home and you've got no money coming in, you learn to get people to trust you, to talk to so that they trust you and they want to hire you. And thankfully, I don't have to do a lot of that anymore. I am like Popeye. I am who I am, and hopefully the clients like me.
And in your line of work, is that pretty typical, or are you seeing, especially in the bigger cities, that there's a lot of competition with Google AdWords to try to build a private criminal defense practice?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of competition in Maine for that.
There is, yeah.
Yeah, sure. And it mostly I find is in the space of like, the attorney who has the more churn and burn type practice, right? So
The drunk driving defense.
yeah, exactly. But it also is, particularly in larger cities, the fact that there's more competition, but there's also more people. So, I mean, I have a lot of friends who have been practicing longer than I have, who have never advertised in their life and are very successful. And I have other friends who are out there constantly advertising and are also successful. I don't think there's any one way when it comes to that. I do think, you have to be careful when we're talking before about firm economics and being careful, being judicious about, the red that's going out of the firm. I mean, I think you do have to figure out, how much bang for your buck you're getting with those types of advertisements because, you know, if you find yourself rejecting a lot of cases, maybe it's not worth it.
Well, Tim, we've come to almost the end of our hour here. It's been great chatting with you, and this time has flown by, and really appreciate your coming and sharing this with us. And I mean, I feel like as a plaintiff's lawyer, that we and the criminal defense bar, I've always felt like we're kind of the most closely aligned, maybe politically and just personality wise, because I share your sort of anti-authoritarian bent. We're both kind of challenging the system in different ways, and so I really do feel a closeness to you and your peers, and I think it would be great if we can continue to share stories and information that can be mutually beneficial going forward. So thank you for doing that today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I do think, I agree, Ben. I see the exact same thing. We are always David versus Goliath, right? On both the plaintiff's bar and the criminal defense bar. And I think we share that in common. And we also share in common the fact that we're dealing with the general public. We're not dealing with a captive client. And so you have to care about who your audience is. And if you don't, you're not going to last very long. But it's been a lot of fun being here. I thanks for the invite. I'll come back anytime you want.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. It was great.
Thanks for listening to Elevate, Build and Grow Your Law Firm. Share with colleagues if you found it valuable. Remember, building a successful law firm takes discipline, strategy, and determination. But you're not alone. Produced and powered by Law Pods.